Hello and welcome to part 4 of my video tutorial series on how to make a simple cave battle map using GIMP. Typically for tabletop role-playing games would be the purpose behind these maps. I've got links below in the description to parts 1, 2, and 3 of this series. Those parts collectively cover how to start from complete scratch and work your way up to getting a map that looks like what you see in front of you here. This video, part 4, is going to be pretty short and sweet. I just want to focus on one feature that is present in quite a few of my maps and is a welcome addition to any map in general, and that would be how to draw a ledge or a cliff, which would add a vertical element to your map, which is something that players definitely can make use of, enjoy, and adds a bit of fun to your session. So like I said, I'm going to show you how to draw the ledge here in this cave battle map, and you can apply what you learn in this video to any number of different locations or settings. So what I'm going to do first off is create a new layer. So I've got the lines layer for the walls. On top of that, I'm going to make a layer that's called lines ledge. And again, this is just how I name my layers. You don't have to do that, obviously. I just like to remain consistent with how I name things. So I'm sure as you go about doing this, you'll figure out your own method and system that works. So I've already picked this spot here as the location for where the ledge is going to be. And all I'm going to do is make sure that I have my lines ledge layer selected. I've got my brush settings here. I'm using hardness 75, which is right here in the GIMP default. Size is 10, opacity is 100, and I'm just going to draw a pretty squiggly line from here to here. So just something like that. Okay. And I could stop there and call that ledge done, and then just add some shading below it. But what I typically like to do is add a little bit of depth to this ledge to just kind of, I guess, further visually indicate that that is a ledge and not just a weird line in the middle of the floor. So one way that you could do that is you could just make a second line that's like adds a little bit of thickness to it, and it just kind of follows that slope, and that's fine. That's not like a wrong way of doing things, and in fact, that's how I used to draw my ledges. But what I've done more recently is I've actually added a bit of a variation on that, and to kind of explain what I'm going to do, what I'll do is I'll kind of draw a little bit of a ledge here. So you've got your upper elevation here, and then you've got the floor below. Some cliffs or ledges would kind of just be like sort of a steep slope, not actually a straight drop. And that would be kind of what you saw when I did this. That would represent kind of that situation. But then other ledges will, in fact, they'll kind of track backwards like that, right? And then you'd end up with something like that where you have the top ledge overhanging the bottom ledge, and so it kind of comes in a little bit. Which, if this is the way that I would decide that this ledge behaves all the way across, then pretty much my work is done here. But what I like to do is actually a combination of those two styles where you have some overhang and some underhang. And so the way that I do that typically is I will kind of make the quote-unquote bottom line of this ledge start out wide and then kind of tuck underneath and then come back out and then tuck underneath again and come back out again. So I'll just show you what I mean here. So I just take it from here, kind of tuck it underneath, come back out again, that tucks underneath, just tidy up that line, and then it comes back out again right here. There. So as you see it now, you've got the upper ledge, it's sticking out here, it's overhanging, and then it's overhanging again, and then at the bottom you've got the ledge kind of cheating out, and you can see it here. So I prefer that visually to what I used to do. I'm just going to delete or erase that stuff here while I've got a chance. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is add some color, some base color to the visible parts of the ledge that you see here. So we'll go ahead and get that new layer created, and we're going to call it base ledge. And we're going to use the fuzzy select tool again, like we did in the past with selecting the walls and the floor and the rubble. But you'll notice one difference here is that we only have the lines ledge layer is just those couple of zigzaggy lines, and it's not a with the exception of this middle section here, it's not not a closed area that we can select here. So if we were to go to the fuzzy select tool, just to give you an example of what I mean, what will happen is if you select that, it's going to select all of this, and then everything else all the way out here, including this little sliver here. And the only thing it's not going to select is the lines themselves, and then this space in here, this isn't the selection that we want to make, right? So to get around that, there's another feature that you can toggle here called sample merge. And what that does is it allows you to make a fuzzy selection based on every single visible layer or active layer. And so instead of, if I were to click here now, or let's say if I click here, it's going to select everything out to these black lines, but then it's also going to stop where I have this grid line, right? So it's taking into account every layer visible. And if you click over here where you've got like a lot of different shades here, you'll notice too that the selection behaves accordingly, right? So this isn't exactly what we want either. So we've got the right tool, but there's a problem with it. So the way that we get around that actually is we will disable the grid layer, we'll disable the texture layer on the floor, and we'll disable the shading layer. And now all we're left with is the lines and the floor base colors. And in this example, in this situation, I suppose we have the shading from the rubble as well, but right now it's not going to actually get in our way, so I haven't disabled that. So now, with the sample merged on a fuzzy select, it actually doesn't matter which layer you're selecting right now. It's going to behave the exact same way. It's going to make the same selection. But now we can go ahead and click here, and sorry, I should say I held shift when I clicked that. So let me just undo that. So I've got this selection, and I want to add this one to it. Normally, if I were to just click again, it just changes the selection from one to the other. But if I want to add them to each other, I just hold shift, and you'll notice my cursor ends up adding a little plus symbol there. That's how you know that you're going to add a selection to the existing one. So then you click, and you keep holding shift, and you click a third time. And now you've got the basic selection made here. And I still need to grow the selection so that it covers everything into the actual fully through the line. So if I go selection grow, and I'm going to go with, let's call it 6 pixels. Okay, so there, we've managed to, without bleeding out onto the other side of the lines, we've managed to grab every aspect of those the visible parts of this ledge. Okay, so now that we've got that selection made, we're going to go to the we'll make sure that we have the base ledge layer selected. We're going to use our paint bucket tool, and the color that we want to fill it with. In this example, I believe I have the color saved, but if you didn't have it here in your recently used colors, one way that you can retrieve that color for use again is if you use this eyedropper right here. It allows you to just sample a color anywhere on your canvas. So I want the color to be, roughly the same color as this rebel. So I'm just going to click somewhere inside there. It's going to make a new color. I hit OK, and I've got my paint bucket tool selected, and I've got the option to fill the complete selection here, and I just click once, and it fills it. Okay, great. So I'm now going to release the selection or deselect all, and that's just Control Shift A. And what you'll notice is this looks pretty good here, but you'll notice that this doesn't look quite good, and that's because the base color layer is sitting on top of the lines layer for the walls. So the quick and easy fix for that is just to put the lines layer up on top of the base layer. There, now it looks fine. Okay. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show you guys here is how to actually add some shading to really visually indicate or to convey that difference in height between high and low ground. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make a selection of this ground down below the ledge, and then we are going to use a similar shading layer as we've done in the past in a couple of different spots here. So before I make my fuzzy selection tool, or before I make my fuzzy select, I make sure that sample merged is on because we still want to make use of that option. But I'm going to have to deselect the shading from the rubble now, because that's going to get in the way. I want to make sure that the shading from this ledge, I want to make sure that I can shade all the way in. So now with that being said, actually I'm going to deselect the rubble too, and click once, and there I've got my selection of the floor below the ledge. And the reason why I removed the rubble from the selection as well, or remove the layers from visibility so that when I make a selection it also covers that space, is because the shading from this ledge, I wanted to also make the rubble that is nearby a little bit darker as a result too, to really accentuate that height difference. So now with this selection made, I will grow it, and 5 is probably good. Yeah, it looks good to me. So now we're going to need to make a new layer, and we're going to we have to make sure that it's going to be underneath these line layers and underneath this base layer, but it can be on top of everything else. So what I'm going to do is add a new layer, call it shading from ledge, and see it automatically, because I had that layer group selected, it puts the layer at the top of the layer hierarchy within that group, and I don't want that, so I'm actually going to move it up and over right there. Perfect. And I'm going to change the blending mode to overlay. Okay, so now that I've got this fuzzy selection made here, I'm just going to make sure I'm back to my brush setting here, my brush tool. I'm going to make sure that my color is back to black and not still that brown that we had from the ledge base layer. I turned down my opacity to about 16, and I chose a hardness of 25 brush, and I pumped up the size of the brush to about 225. I mean, it's not an exact science, so you can choose kind of within that range. The reason why I turned down the opacity to 16% is I don't want one single brushstroke to have a giant impact on the shading. I want to be able to really gradually lay in the shading. It's a more effective way of actually doing this. It ends up being more brushstrokes, but you get to be a bit more precise with the end result. So I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So one brushstroke, you can see the impact that it's had there, and that's pretty good already. It's added some shading, but I like it to be a bit more pronounced than that. So I'll do a second stroke, and then you know what? I want to kind of include a little bit further out. So I color all of that, and then I add another brush stroke just snug to close to the ledge, and then maybe one more. And just to make sure that I know what it's going to look like as an end result, I'm going to go ahead and turn the texture and shading layers back on, just to really make sure that it's going to look okay. And I'll turn back on the rubble layers too. You know what? In fact, I'll turn on every layer. Now when I zoom out, you can already see that there's definitely a height difference there, and you can just like intuitively, when you look at it with your own eyes, that does look like there's an elevation change now, just because of that shading that we added. And I might add one more strip just to make sure. Maybe a second one. There. Great. I'm going to go ahead and go Control Shift A to deselect. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for this video. That's how I typically add ledges to my maps. Depending how energetic I'm feeling, I can add all kinds of detailed line work in there to add a little bit more, I guess, yeah, a bit more texture to the walls themselves and stuff like that. But this is good enough for a basic battle map. So this concludes part 4. My next one's probably going to be adding a water feature in here somewhere. I will be leaning into creating shorter videos in the future so that I can really focus on 1 or 2 key points with each video rather than larger in scope. Makes these tutorials a bit more digestible for you folks. If you like the video and want to see more, don't hesitate to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That way you'll be the first to know when I release content such as this. I'm also open to suggestions on what sort of features or maps I should tackle in subsequent videos, so hit me up in the comments. I do make a point of reading them all. If you're interested in getting your hands on any of my maps, by the way, you can head on over to my publisher page on DriveThruRPG, where you can peruse my catalog of maps. The link for that will be in the description below. Take care and happy mapping.